Hi, this is the first episode of my podcast after a long break of 6 months, and I have a few news for you. So I have decided to rename the podcast to DebunkingTaboos and to switch the podcast language to English, which is also something big. So in this episode I have decided to invite Lyndon, a psychotherapist, to discuss PTSD and his experience with CPTSD. So enjoy. What is your name?
My name is Lyndon Williams.
Okay, and where do you work? What is your position or?
Okay, so I work for my own company. It's called YomoDojo, which is YomoDojo. It is an expression of logotherapy, which is a modality developed by Viktor Frankl. So I was trained as a logotherapist, that's what I'm doing.
How did you end up here in Prague? Why Prague?
Sure. Originally, I was invited here to come and work for a small business. My previous experience was in the world of advertising and marketing. I was a strategist, and that could mean lots of different things, but basically someone who plans out business, I suppose you could put it that way, the business of advertising and marketing, but I have other general business skills. So I was asked to come and work for a small company here that wanted to grow, and my job was basically as a general manager to set up the infrastructure, recruit the people, basically get the business up and running from a startup of one guy, and then build it out. So that's what I did. I came here in November, oh gosh, let me think now. I should have this, 2016. Yeah, November 2016. And I started in the middle of November. I came at the beginning and started at the middle of November. So just sort of getting things together, making a business plan, and then implementing it. So it took me about 4 months to plan the business, because there was two businesses then, I had to merge it into one. So I started there, and that's what I ended up working on for a couple of years here in Prague. And originally I had the idea for YomoDojo. When I came to Prague, I'd already made a plan for it, like a structure as to what I saw it as.
So what is it actually like? What is the goal of this project? What is it doing?
Sure. Well, it's sort of three words. So it's yo, mojo, mo, and dojo, which is a dojo. So what does it mean then in its sort of totality? Well, the insight that I learned about, see, I'd studied psychology and psychotherapy together at different points. Sorry, first of all individually, then collectively. In a way, I found that psychology had something that was a component that was missing, and I thought that psychotherapy had a component that was missing. Either one of them was a little bit too esoteric, which like psychotherapy can be, and I thought that at some stage psychology could be too reductionistic. So, if you can't combine, you need to sort of combine the two for it to be an effective way of actually addressing, I would say, people and their problems. Well, addressing doesn't really sound good to me, but approaching people in their life situation. So, because I'm very mindful of the fact that, you can't go and judge someone for being a human being, because the problems that they experience are really defined within the human experience, and that is got quite a wide variety of different ways of expressing itself. So why YomoDojo? Well, I had struggled to find something that I thought that would encapsulate the approach that I'd learned from studying the work of Viktor Frankl and his approach in logotherapy at an institute in the Netherlands called Nylea. I won't give you the Dutch name, but it's in the simplified English version. It's the Dutch Institute of Logotherapy and Existential Analysis. So logotherapy is concerned with what's called existential analysis. So what that really means is that you look at someone's life in the context of a biography, of what they come to you with, their life story, and whether or not they find that their lives are meaningful to them, okay, which is, meaning is a very kind of difficult word to define in many, many ways, because the sort of big question for most people is, what is the meaning of life, like as a general concept. They're not really looking at what is the meaning of my life or what could be the meaning of my life. It's very difficult to actually sort of understand that, because in context, if we look at ourselves at a particular point in time, like to say, what is the meaning of my life? Most people go, I don't really know, or there is no meaning. And in essence, it's true that there is no generic meaning. There's only a specific meaning to someone in their life. So what does that mean? Well, there we go, mean and meaning. So everyone comes into this world, I suppose, obviously through a certain pathway. We are born, and our lives start. Some might say it started before, through all of evolution. But we'll just keep it simple right now and stick with the fact that when you pop out and say, "Hey, world, what's going on?" that your life begins, and obviously we go through different developmental stages. This is undisputed in a way. Like, you can't really argue against that there definitely are these different life stages that we go through. So we could look at psychology from that perspective, but also, to give you a sort of more quantified example about like what logotherapy focuses on, or how we could see psychotherapy and psychology. This glass is defined by its physical properties, Water is not coming out of it, but water is in it. And we could say that psychology is the sort of, like the underlying, I wouldn't call it programming, but should we call it like this sort of meta structure that right now is helping me to use language. But what it also is that it's a structure and a framework within which a human being exists. So there's the biological aspect of me, the physical reality of me. But there's another component, the sort of, should we call it factor X, which is and I don't want this to sound like woo-woo, but like the spiritual dimension. What is the spiritual dimension? We can look at human beings and say, okay, well, we can look at them through the lens of psychology and sort of diagnose them with certain problems or issues or, qualities about them. But in spite of all these things that may go right or go wrong, there's someone entirely else. They kind of defy the logic. You would think like, well, if you've experienced this, this, and this, and this, you should do that, that, and that. Yes, you may exhibit certain patterns of behavior. Is to address you in your individual self, in your individual uniqueness. And we approach things that every human being is individual and unique, and they have the capacity to express themselves through their lives, and we have to sort of take into account what is a life in essence, because one of the core concepts of Frankl's work is sort of tragic optimism. And why though? Because you and me, we will both one day die physically, this is, unless we're not. We're one of the few species that we know from what we know so far, we're consciously aware of our death. you know, and it's a strange thing, you know, oh, one day I'm going to croak, and some people freak out about it and they go, oh my Lord, and they can develop certain neuroses about fears and, you know, all sorts of other things. But I suppose what everyone has to do throughout their lives is to live their authentic being. So what is your authentic being? Well, it is about living your authentic, should we say, objective values, you know, because your values are objective to you. They're subjective to other people, but they're very much you. And I think that if we start to appreciate that in each other, we can see each other as unique beings and individuals, and that we can also respect each other from a very genuine way. So there's so obviously having a solution like YomoDojo, what's the problem? So most of us at some stage, you know, we go through this birth phase, we go through childhood, we go through early adulthood, or being teenagers, becoming adults, and, you know, going through different life stages. Who we are as our identities, they change over time. And we have socially accepted or projected identities that we take on, you know, so we can find our place in the hierarchy of social order. That's kind of part of, you have to be cognizant of that. But also there's something else that comes out of that. And unfortunately, we can, maybe because of the fact that life can be quite complicated and difficult, we can stray away from who we know ourselves to really be and end up feeling empty or alone, or we can feel angry or nihilistic, and that we start to develop sort of symptoms in a way of like, our life lacks a meaning. What is the purpose of my being? Why should I be here? Why should I be responsible? What is the value to me? And I think, you know, in a way, religion used to play the role where it gave us something to aim at or to focus on, which was transcendent of our, let's be honest, at times horrible physical reality. I mean, you know, you could say, I'm feeling great, and then you've got like this massive toothache or headache, or you hurt yourself, and you're like, what's this all about, man? This is supposed to be fun, and I'm like in pain. This sucks. So we can get lost. We can forget who we are. That's what I'm aiming at. So you can forget who the your bit is. Who am I? Like, I don't know. Oh, so what do I do now? And we can unfortunately end up picking different ways to kind of express our anxiety. It causes something which is called in logotherapy the existential vacuum. So you like floating around in life, and nothing seems to make sense, and everything feels like, well, I've been here, done that, what's going on? So, right, so there's that. There's your you. The mojo bit. Okay, mojo. Again, I'm addressing, I must be honest, I stole the idea from Austin Powers. Like everyone, you need to know who to steal your ideas from. Mojo is like life force, life energy. It's a sort of indescribable part of being alive, you know. And again, the ancients have been talking about this forever, you know, all sorts of different ways, and manifests itself. And so mojo is really about your life spirit. What is it about you that gets you going? What is it that fulfills you? How do you kind of like map your way or sort of track your way through life? The last part, is the dojo. I suppose your and mojo, those two are quite closely correlated. So if you feel good about, not just feel good, but if you feel like you're doing something meaningful with your life, like you feel fulfilled. Fulfillment is, I suppose, the best way of determining, like, how do I know if I'm doing something meaningful? I feel fulfilled in quite often doing a difficult task, And once you've done it, you're like, oh, wow, that's great. You know, I mean, we all know this feeling once you've done something and you're like, damn, that was hard, but wow, it actually feels good to have accomplished that. Most of the time, you know, that's because we take on a responsibility in order to achieve an objective. And that objective sometimes is for ourselves, but more than often, actually, as human beings, we live outwards for each other. You know, we serve each other, you know. It's kind of like, well, it should be quite obvious, but it's not, because in a way we live in a world that's we're so far removed from each other in so many different ways that we don't actually really realize how reliant we are on each other to sort of fulfill. Like right now, okay, like I couldn't say what I'm saying or do what I'm doing unless you were here too. And so it's not sort of codependent in a negative sense, but for me to be me, you need to be you. And in that way, we have an exchange which is very, very human. It's, you know, you can also see it with kids. So the dojo part, this is a school. Like this is taken from, again, this is, I suppose, a little bit esoteric and philosophical, but a dojo is obviously not obviously, but it comes from Japan. So the idea, so a dojo is a very kind of clean and open place where the martial arts, the physical world, is used to interact with the spiritual world. Because the whole goal, actually, with martial arts is to take you, which is defense. You learn to protect yourself. Okay. So it's about protection. Of course, it can be used for other purposes too, like everything can. So a dojo is more like a school. So a school to find the way. Okay, so everything that a dojo aims at is to take people from various different levels of, should we say, performance in whatever martial art they can do, proficiency, and to help them grow as a human being. Because the whole point is to really move from the physical to the transcendent, so that when you are doing your movements in a, should we say, I don't know, Kenpo or Aikido or anything like that, you're actually learning a way. But the funny thing is that when they teach you, the whole idea actually behind any martial art is to teach you the basics, and then you go and create your own. You know, your own way. So you become a master when you master yourself. And that's the thing. It's not like mastering all obviously there's different moves, but then you know that you've gone beyond that, where you understand it's really a path towards enlightenment. And obviously that's kind of an open topic. I really couldn't tell you what really enlightenment is. I don't think anyone can. They've been trying to do that for thousands of years. But the whole point is this really, is to sort of help you to rediscover who you are. And if not that, to help you refine who you think you are and what you want to do with your life. Understanding that you've got so much time to do things in, and to not delay living your life, because a lot of people get caught today in this cycle of I wouldn't just call it procrastination. It is procrastination to an extent, but insecurity. So you can be securely in yourself, even though the world around you is quite insecure, and you can find your path and move on your way. Why pick this particular road? Well, there's a lot of great things that you can derive out of psychology, for sure. A lot of great insights and sort of methods and means of treatment. But the biggest problem I've found for myself, at least, was that it didn't address the human being as a sort of in their sort of spiritual dimension. This is a very loaded term, because it's like, oh my gosh, it's religious. We all have sort of a semi-religious relationship to life, like a connection, you know. Like there's no kind of like evolutionary or biological reason why you could look at a sunrise and go, that's beautiful, or a sunset, or the birds going across the sky, or the beauty of a flower, or something that really lifts you out of the moment, you know. I mean, There's that dimension. It's the sort of, it's very hard to, I think, to quantify it as such. So it's so in like totality, my kind of concept, I've started off with individual counseling and therapy, but it's to really kind of like you have to build your own school as such, your own curiosity about life and learning and growing. And it's to help to provide people tools that they can learn to grow themselves with. And that's it. So it's kind of a very long explanation. I suppose I should work on that, Dan, shouldn't I? Yeah. But it's the first time that I'm explaining it to you as such. And I think that this is where it differs. It has a sort of philosophical, a meta-psychology, a meta-philosophy that comes before it. So, as Frankl stated, you need a sort of metaclinical approach. Before you address your client or patient, you need to come in with a sort of perspective on what it means to be a human being. But it has to be in such a way that it's not a projection of an ideology, because that would be just awful. They would end up going like, well, I follow the 10 rules, I haven't got the diamond star in my head, and what am I going to do? So you can't be respectful to someone's individual uniqueness by prescribing them this like 5-step approach or 12 steps or to do whatever you want to do. You can give them ideas, and then you can help them to shape an approach. And from that perspective, if you look at it this way, if I was successful at what I did, when you it's just a process. It's like sort of the old saying about teach someone how to fish and they can feed themselves, give them a fish they can eat once. So you're teaching them how to fish. So part of what I do as well is I teach them some of the psychology that is useful to them in their particular situation, or if I don't know, I help them figure that out. So it's so that they can go and live their own life, free from, not necessarily free, because you can never totally be free from anything, but less influenced by other factors that may have influenced them, like culture or how they may have been treated, is to sort of lift them out of the darkness that we can find ourselves in, and give them the tools that they can do it themselves. So instead of creating a situation where they continually need to have like affirmation from others, that it comes from who they are. So it's a slightly different approach.
Logotherapy is basically specializes on meaning of life and and on grief counseling.
Well, Viktor Frankl went into several concentration camps already with his manuscript predefined. He had prior to that been in contact with both Jung and Freud, and to a degree Adler. So we know that in terms of the schools of psychotherapy, there was Jungian psychotherapy, or sort of his approach. His name now. What was his name? Albert? No way. Carl Jung. And there was obviously Freud. There was Alfred Adler, who individual psychology. So there was this is the different elements that they looked at. So Jung was looking at sort of, should we say, the kind of he looked at the unconscious, individual psychotherapy. Then Freud was looking at sort of psychodynamic, and then Adler was looking at social psychology, but there was nothing to integrate them all together.
So this, he decided to integrate all three.
Correct. So he at least that was his ambition. I can't say for sure that anyone totally got it. I don't think even Frankl got everything right. No one does. No one. I mean, it's like we could look at even Sir Isaac Newton, how much stuff he got wrong before he got lucky, and hey, this works, oh my God, all the other crap. You see, this is quite often in life. this is the glass of water we see. We do not see the fact that we are surrounded by more water than land on this planet, and this is a representative of that. This is representing all the water that we have on our planet, and we are pretty much all water too. So, but it's in a way symbolic that it's refined. Frankl, he sort of tried to integrate it. He respected all the different elements that come together, but he said, well, what really makes a person a person? Is it just like, social forces? It would never explain why certain people have risen above the situations they were in to actually go out and put something into life. So yeah, unfortunately, Frankl's work was reduced to he's a concentration camp survivor. So this is where he came up with his idea. It's just not true. He had been working on it prior to.
Was he studying this approach on people that are in those concentration camps?
No, actually, he was. Viktor Frankl was a doctor. First of all, a medical doctor. And he decided he specialized he was a neurologist. He decided to focus into psychiatry, and he started to work with within the sort of Austrian medical system with suicide patients. And I think he sort of came into his work with a sort of intuition. And he developed it from there. So he entered into the concentration camps with an idea, but obviously he didn't know that he was going to have basically a laboratory, not to put it in a terrible way, but he would get to see how this played out. Why in essence, why did people survive under these horrible conditions? What exactly were they doing? Because you would think, in a way, a lot of people who go through traumatic events and they still are here, for what reason, And through the course of his imprisonment, and obviously you can read the accounts in Man's Search for Meaning, he got to see that the people who made it through the concentration camps, through some of the most awful things we could imagine, they had either someone to live, they were there to reunite with a loved one, even if they weren't, in some cases, even alive, but they could imagine themselves enduring what they had to endure to reunite with their families.
Yeah, I suppose they came out with some different person that they were before.
Absolutely. Well, here's the interesting thing. A lot of them came out differently. Obviously, then when they went in, it would be unusual if they didn't. There was Dr. Henry Crystal. He was also a survivor. He was from Poland. He was a psychiatrist who did a lot of work post-World War II on Holocaust survivors. And, some people, obviously everyone was affected, some people more than others. I mean, we know this phenomenon anyway in psychology, that you could take identical twins and put them through, not deliberately, it would be unethical, but they can go through very similar situations, but one of them will come out okay, well adjusted, and the other one will just be shattered.
Yeah, it will be completely individual.
Correct. Either you have, he sort of boiled it down to three things. Frankl boiled it down to three things. Either there was someone to reunite with a loved one, that love for them kept them alive, and that this is what they wanted to fulfill. This is what made it bearable. Or else they had still something to do, unfinished business in a way. It was I still want to do this, screw it, I'm going to hang on. or else they had some work to fulfill, you know, a work to finish, some creative work. And creative work can be literally anything, you know, anything that where you apply your skills and knowledge to, that's creative work. So from those three, shall we say, basic cores, you know, this is what he noticed. This is how they managed to endure what they endured. Those that survived, because there were a lot of people that obviously didn't survive, no matter what they believed. But a lot of them who sort of did actually make it, this is what drove them forward. So he understood that from his prior work with psychiatric patients, because normally he was in the suicide ward, why were some of them still alive? Because they were struggling to live, but they didn't know how to move forward. You know, what was it for? There was no meaning to their suffering. So, you know, they couldn't find a way to express those. First of all, they had kind of lost all the kind of, should we call it, value map disappeared. They didn't know who they were anymore or what was going on. You know, life can be very cruel and hard at times, and you can get lost. And it's sort of my kind of illustration is like walking into a maze, and the lights get turned off, and you're trying to get your way out. And you know, quite often you will spiral down into a darker place, but you try and find your way out. But here's the funny thing about life: once you've left one maze, you find yourself in another one. So it's just about making different mazes, you know. But it's kind of like, in a way, like, I wouldn't say that logotherapy is shock treatment, because that doesn't sound so good. But in a way, it's like, you know, you can address a human being as a human being, like, okay, so the past has happened, we cannot change it, we want to find a future. It's future focused, okay? That's a very important thing to sort of remember, that there is something still to fulfill. And on top of that, that the meaning of your life is only really, shall we say, concluded when you close your eyes for the last time. Not like in a movie like, is he dead? Yes. Oh God, he came back. Get him down, vampires. and you know, you've got to, you've like, that there is at least the potential, the hope. You have to reinstill a sense of hope into people, because without hope, there's just devastation. And, you know, particularly in a situation that maybe you can really relate to right now, when all the normal structures have been destroyed, disconnected, people are feeling like they're refugees in their own home country, even in their own home city. Do I belong? What is my future like? They remember the past. You know, family members have died or been imprisoned or kidnapped or tortured, or all these traumatic and terrible things are happening. And they may feel, let's be honest, life is shit. I'm fucked. You know, like, what do I do now? And if you multiply that out against a large enough population size, despair sets in. And once despair comes in, then nothing in a way can retrieve them back from the darkness of that sorrow and pain and suffering. So we have to move with them through that. I know we're kind of jumping the gun a bit, but I suppose I just realized that there's a relationship between, in a way, I suppose, an application of logotherapy towards what we face now in this real tragedy. You know, it's a tragedy of despair as much as of war. You know, that people are going to have to rebuild their lives.
Let's talk about PTSD.
It's a dance move that's very hot on TikTok right now. I could totally show you. Okay, so
yeah, what is PTSD? Can you define it?
Sure. post-traumatic stress disorder. So if we break it down, post, after, traumatic, some sort of traumatic event. Post-traumatic stress disorder, stress. So in simple terms, let me think of a good example. Okay. You know what a time delay fuse is? Okay. Basically, it's a fuse that if you want to, maybe a fuse, this is like destruction, doesn't sound so good. A timer, there we go. I'm thinking to myself, it's quite violent. Okay, a timer. So we had a timer, and we wanted something to happen, like a light to turn on. So you can buy timers that turn lights on at certain points in time. You know, plug it in, set the timer, tick, 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 it turns the light on at one point and turns it off, right? So in a way, we can apply that same sort of idea to an event can happen in someone's life that is traumatic to them, that causes them, their body to go into a fight, flight, fawn, should we say, stage, you know. They've experienced shock. They're in a state of shock, obviously for that moment in time. At the moment of the actual trauma, psychologically, this is like physiologically, some people will get trapped in that moment. They may not realize it though. Some do realize it, and they shrink, become small, and suddenly life becomes dark, dangerous, horrible. They start to shape an idea about the world, that it's a nasty place. You're stuck, but you don't know it. You're trapped in this kind of prison that you can't feel. Your life can't move on. You reflect a lot on the past. You have a lot of social anxieties about fear, about other people either hurting you and you imagine it, or it's really happening and you don't know how to respond to it. You're trapped in a position, you're frozen in time, you haven't been able to grow or move on. And why does it, that's the stress part. But post-traumatic, obviously it means, well, hang on a second, that must mean somewhere in the future. Something has happened and it's affecting you in one way or another, in your behavior, your thoughts, your attitudes. You can't detect it, but it starts to manifest itself in, shall we say, intrusive thoughts that are harmful to yourself, ideas about yourself that are just awful. You know, you feel lost, alone, depressed quite often, like there's always something wrong. And what it does though is that over a period of time, you know, you can accumulate on top of that other instances where that one anchoring moment starts to reinforce itself. It's almost like climbing a negative. It's almost like you've got two mountains to climb, one with a beautiful view and one where you jump into the fire. While when PTSD, you're jumping into the fire and then being reborn and jump back. So it's sort of also a continual...
So this kind of cycle of...
It's a cycle of trauma that you relive in various different ways. And when it becomes a disorder as such, it's so powerful that it's entering your world and you just become totally disoriented. You can develop what's called DID, dissociative identity disorder. You lack a sense of self, of safety, of well-being, of being okay. We might say that of many other types of disorders, but in this particular one, it really, I suppose in a way, it could, from these events, I think there are two different paths that can be taken. One will lead you into narcissism, and the other one will lead you into a CPTSD sufferer. Yeah, I think that's where the two diverge. So one will become like a sort of uber egoist, and the other one is kind of the opposite side of it.
So what is the difference between PTSD and CPTSD?
Okay, so obviously there's some people may feel that they're the same, and in essence, you know, subjectively it can be true, but CPTSD has really, should we say, more come to light through studies into how veterans returning from war have like internalized the memories of things that happened to them or things they witnessed. You see, you can be traumatized by just looking at something that's traumatic. It doesn't have to experience it, because your brain is so clever. It's learning like, this could happen to me. Oh, did it happen to me? That's another thing actually with like PTSD and CPTSD sufferers. They're not sure if the bad thing actually happened or how badly it happened, which is a very strange place to be, because they live in a world of doubt all the time. They doubt themselves. It's just like, but the difference between complex, mostly it's severe trauma. I mean, we're talking like war zones, things like this, where there will be a compounding, should we say, a frequency, which is far more. You could have a traumatic experience, like a dog attacks you. You could develop a fear of dogs. You're a kid. Like even okay, here's a funny thing. I have a scar on my hand, okay, from a corgi dog from when I was like 6 years old, okay, that's over 40 years ago. Right? There's a corgi dog that walks down my road, and I'm still thinking to myself, is that bastard gonna try and eat me? Oh my God, the small corgi dog, arr, arr, arr. And I've got the scar, and it always reminds me of that one incident. And I can literally, right now, as I'm talking to you, my brain can take me straight back, and I can tell you how I was standing. There was a gate, the fence there. This person was on this side of the gate. There were two people here, and I was stroking the dog, and the owner was over there. Like literally right now, I can see where everyone was. I have CPTSD, let's be honest. I can literally tell you, frozen in that moment, I can turn around and tell you where all the chairs were located around the pool. It's bizarre, really strange, okay? What's really interesting is that right now, I haven't thought about that moment in over 40 years. So it just shows you the power of certain things, okay? So luckily, Jason didn't gnaw my whole hand off. I just like me like this, but he did bite me, and it was quite scary for me. There's blood everywhere. And to the day I die, I'll always remember little Jason. Hope that. Anyway, I'm not going to say anything bad about you, Jason. Jason the dog. But the effects of other things, like, shall we say, a lot of children who grow up in violent homes, who experience, whether it's verbal violence, physical violence, sexual abuse, it can just condense itself into all sorts of awful things. Unfortunately, this is like, should we say, like the weapons of war are also used at home, you know? This is, we could sort of draw parallels between there, unfortunately. It's just part of human nature. But when it comes down to the complex trauma, these are like the kind of like deeply buried ones, the ones that are like, they're like if you're trying to remove a stump, like you've cut down a tree, okay, so you want to remove the stump and it's got deep roots. You know, the deepest traumas go the deepest, and complex, it's just like you got to unwind them, you know. It's really things that can manifest in complex post-traumatic stress disorder are things like a smell can trigger off an anxiety attack where you just kind of shrink and you feel scared. I mean, we could put it this way. Anything that takes away your sense of well-being in general and sort of human, should we call it mental fitness or mental health, is in itself a form of, it's a form of PTSD. You know, I think we can see it almost across the board, that actually In little amounts, it's everywhere, but in certain people, it's quite more focused. But in terms of complex CPTSD, at least, it really is. It's kind of like what I described as this sort of it's like these little events, but then they become magnified and multiplied. So they become like the cornerstones of someone's existence. And I hope those builders jump off the building with their equipment just to see if gravity still works. I don't know. I have my doubts. But anyway, I'm so sorry about that. You can edit that out. I'm getting CPTSD from these bastards. There are certain events in life that happen that we remember, and that when we remember them, they trigger anxiety. First of all, our heart rate starts to increase. Our hormone levels go up, cortisol, adrenaline. We start to feel anxiety, heat on our body. Like we're now building up into a flight or fight response. Those are the kind of common things. Yes, okay, but there's a differentiation here. If it's a constant state, we can see that it's always that it's recurring at a certain frequency. That's when it becomes a disorder, because it starts to interfere with your life, with your normal living of life. But CPTSD in itself is just crippling. Like really, you will have soldiers and civilians who've returned from war zones who will just wake up screaming at night. They will have nightmares all the time. Basically, their life is one nightmare. Unfortunately, the prognosis for CPTSD and for more severe forms of PTSD, there really are no, just like with psychopathy, there's not really a way in terms of psychology to treat them. And that I find is like I focus myself on working with people with PTSD and CPTSD, because the only thing that I realize for them, in a way, is like from a logotherapeutic perspective, if I can help them to rekindle a bit of that flame, that hopefully that can take away some of the darkness. Because, disclosure, I suffer from CPTSD and, I suppose I had PTSD and I just upgraded it.
So did you undergo some kind of therapy or some medical treatment?
Of course. Well, to become a therapist, you need to go to therapy too. It was hell. Oh God, I was crying. You see this? I'm kidding. That was quite intense. Very intensely, actually. The problem with CPTSD and coping with I say coping, not curing, coping, is that like the scar with Jason, okay? There are psychic scars in me which will always be there. And to a degree, like quite often, let's say we get our hands dirty, we can wash them and our hands are clean. But like that scar, it's always going to be there. So I know, should we say psycho-spiritually, I can't erase my memories. Sometimes I have flashbacks. A few of them are from repressed memories, which I didn't realize I had. That's the whole tricky thing about the mind. You don't know it's there until suddenly, hey, remember me? Remember that pain? Oh God, that was painful. And I'm like, oh no, not right now. I'm busy. And but the thing is that what I learned is sort of, I would call it in a way coping techniques. I learned to, most importantly, I'd say, actually, when I roll it back a bit, I'd say the fundamentals. Like we talked originally about logotherapy and what it means, but if you don't have a good sense of yourself, if you can't care for yourself, like you actually say, I can love me, as the dirty bastard I am, or whatever, however you may feel about yourself, if you can't accept yourself, it makes it so much harder to actually try and cope. So I'll be very straight with you. I didn't cope with it very well for a long time. I was like, oh God, I'm feeling bad. Is this vodka? You got any more of that shit, like a bottle? And I did. That was my unofficial treatment. Oh yes, vodka, very good. Give me a bottle. I have a liter. All in one go. Yes, that's what the doctor said. Not a great idea. I'm not advocating that at all. I'm just saying, therapists can be idiots too. I was an idiot, a big one. I'm a smaller idiot now, but I'm still an idiot. I experienced some very awful things, and some of them I remembered, and they definitely affected me. Some of them I forgot, and later on in life they came back. And here's another sad thing. There's not a huge amount of work that's been done in terms of diagnostics, in actual diagnostics for a much broader scope of therapists to be able to determine it. But from some of the research or the statistics that have come out from Bessel van der Kolk and various others, it's one of the most seriously underdiagnosed problems we face actually right now. And I think it's manifesting itself in many different ways in society. I think that's why by you addressing this particular topic, I think it's the sort of sleeping giant, angry giant of contemporary social problems. Actually, I think a lot of problems are we've underestimated. Human beings. It just makes me think. We used to live in a time where, like in the old Roman days, they'd have the sort of, the kind of Colosseum or whatever it was, where you go there and watch people stab each other to death, and lions and tigers, and it was like, well, that was normal then. No, it wasn't. It wasn't normal. It's never been normal. That was a spectacle put on by maniacs, okay? I mean, could you imagine, we could see it in like modern day, like Hitler was like, oh, well, let's just go kill a bunch of people, Are you a gypsy? Oh, you're gay, or I don't like the way you look. Oh, you're mentally disabled? Dead. And they mass manufacture that. It happened as well. It's happened throughout human history, let's be honest. I mean, but it's rare occasions. It's when a maniac gets in charge. It goes, well, everyone's got to die for some bizarre reason. But what's happened is that we now live particularly in an age where we've condoned a lot of violence. It's just okay. I mean, here's something which always kind of amuses me in a sort of weird way. The progression. Okay, so we used to have boxing as the major sport, We've now progressed into these different versions of like MMA, and I'm not criticizing MMA. There's obviously great athletes, but what I'm saying is that it's more and more extreme. You've got bare knuckle fighting now, which has come back. Really, that's brutal shit, man. Sorry for swearing. I've been very good the last minutes, but it's like the sort of like really. I mean, we could talk about other things like violence and porn, okay? And I'm going to reference this. Why am I mentioning this right now? Well, in my experience, through some of the people that I've worked with, much to my amazement, actually now, more recently, I'm starting to come across clients who are experiencing violence during their sexual relationships. It's becoming a norm. Yeah, man. It's... Hello? What happened to vanilla?
How can you diagnose PTSD person if it is misdiagnosed a lot? So with which disorders it gets confused or even not noticed?
Sure. throw yourselves off that building. Here's the honest to goodness truth. A lot of people who have CPTSD will not seek treatment. Yeah. Because of shame, because of fear of judgment, because of just not knowing. They literally think this is normal. They literally believe that life is this way. This is what a normal life is. And until they encounter some information which explains to them how they feel, they just won't know and they won't do anything. They'll just think, I'm a loser. I can't connect to anyone. I'm scared all the time. As I said, like with dissociative, I think DID is the closest disorder that comes to it. I lack an identity. I'm not real. Nothing about me is true or real. They hide. You know what? One of the saddest things they do? They isolate themselves. And a lot of them communicate with each other privately online. There's many forums where they talk to each other because they're so scared of the judgment of it. Now, most people are afraid anyway of being labeled with like, you have a disorder, so therefore you are like, you're like a leper. So let's just push them out to the edge and off get rid of them. Jung said something very interesting about human beings, which I think is true. That give him anyone and you will find something. And I know it's true myself. You got to know where to dig. But I think DID is the most commonly associated, should we say, diagnosis that comes with it. A lot of this actually, with a lot of like work, when you are kind of, things like the DSMV, they provide you a framework. But the problem sometimes, quite often with patients and clients, is that they can present these symptoms now, and then these other, we can call them comorbidities at times in other ways, and then they mix and match. So it's like, do we have a new disorder? Because you can actually see, like as the DSM has just developed over time, we're finding more and more and more like disorders as such. But the human condition hasn't really changed to a degree. It's the complexity that we realize of human beings. So in a way, it's also like you could only present certain symptoms to a therapist or counselor, and they would assume that this was your problem. But here's the truth of the matter as well. Whenever I talk to someone new, this might seem really bad, but I assume that they're not lying to me, but they can't tell me what's really wrong because of shame. I realized for myself, total disclosure here, when I first went to therapy, I defined my problem as this, okay? But my real problem was that. I was too ashamed to talk about my real problem because I thought I was going to be judged and condemned. But over time, I had to bring them together. One of my breakthrough moments for myself was with, I'll tell you his name. His name is Alan Mayer. He's an excellent Canadian psychotherapist. Wonderful, wonderful man, truly wonderful. And he said to me, he asked me a simple question, because we were in therapy for 3 years. And he said to me, in all this time, I've never heard you speak from the first person. Yeah. So that's another key factor with people with CPTSD, mostly CPTSD. They don't refer to themselves in the first person. They're always describing other things outside of them, like they're witnesses all the time. And, you know, when he said that to me, I just broke down in tears. Like, he's like, do you exist? And a part of me, just like that little part that couldn't, because I couldn't cry. That's another thing. A lot of victims, of sufferers, let's not call them victims, let's not demean them. A lot of sufferers, they don't know how to express their emotions. Like, they don't know how to cry. One of the most fundamental parts of being a human being is to being able to release. They don't know how to let go. They are like this. Look at them this in a way. They can become, what are the consequences? They can become what you might call like emotional hoarders. You can hoard ideas and things, and you know, it goes. So as you said, like it's very hard to sort of get a clear diagnosis as such. I mean, I gave you a list of those affects, and that, I must be honest with you, that list of like what 20 or 30 things that you feel or experience. If you gave that to someone with CPTSD, you just see their eyes like light up, like, oh my gosh. You have to, like with everything, you've like got to tease it out. Like the same thing when you're helping someone to find their core values or to reestablish an identity. You've got to make them feel safe. You've got to open the door and let them know it's okay. You know, you've got to help them to come out of that darkness that they're stuck in. Some of them don't even know they're actually in a dark place, because for them it's become normal. You know, if you've grown up in nursery, say, the darkness is normal.
Do you think that a psychotherapist that is diagnosed with some mental disorder should be allowed to work?
Definitely not. They should be thrown away. Hang on.
And on which occasions do you think they shouldn't work with clients?
Well, I can get into lots of trouble for answering this question. Listen, I think it's a case of personal ethics. I mean, there are ethics that are... I'm not going to be political. I'm going to first start out being a little bit political and then get specific. I think that there are ethical guidelines that you need to follow. Like, I follow the APA guidelines myself. I had to do that. No, I didn't have to. I chose to do that. Because I do think you need guidelines, particularly, you know, when you're working with someone who's feeling vulnerable. We all know about, well, we all know, us in the secret society of psychologists, that there's something called attachment theory. Or the attachment hypothesis, how we attach to each other. There can be something called countertransference, which is a lot of problems in relationships stem from how we attach to our childhood, who was influential in our childhood. Mother, father, obviously being the most important roles for young children. We understand a lot of the world from that. If we don't develop healthy attachment styles to life, to each other, we can become addicted to other people, you know. So why do I mention that first in answering this question? I think every time that I talk to someone or I work with them, I have to be very consciously in my own frame so that I'm respecting them and not becoming one of their abusers. Because there has to be kind of a, I'm not saying like a no man's land, but there has to be safety and security, but also a distance, so that they have the freedom to be who they need to be. In a way, and this is what will sound controversial, you have to give them like unconditional love and acceptance at that point in time. Now that can get misunderstood as something else, such as your patient, or even, let's be honest, some therapists do this, become attracted to their client in a spiritual, psychological, and let's be very straight, sexual way. There are some no-nos. Don't have sex with your client. That's a big no-no, Vegas style no-no, okay? Unfortunately, some people break those rules. They do. You know who you are. You have to have an ethical backbone, I think. And you have to know where you begin and where they end. Or they begin as well and end. You have to respect the individuality of your client. You shouldn't. So you're not allowed to. It's the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not hurt thy client. Let's put it this way. Let's roll it back one more step, actually. Let's just go to the foundations of the ethics of medicine. Okay. So medicine is founded on a few principles that you shouldn't do any harm. You shouldn't do any extra harm. Don't make it worse. Don't make it worse. Don't make it. Yeah. But there's there's a sort of turnaround on that one. The patient should want to get better. That's very important. You need to make an evaluation. Does this person want to help themselves? And can I, as who I am, attempt to help them? And I think it's a very serious question you need to ask yourself. That's why, whilst it's not very long, most people have a 20-minute contact with any potential client to see if there's a possibility of maybe things moving forward in a healing relationship. It's a healing relationship. So you can have love relationships, which are close, intimate, and personal, but a healing relationship is one that a doctor has, a therapist has. You must go into this seeking out the healing of the person that you're working with. And unless you can leave a lot of your animal nature outside the door, it's going to influence that interaction. And that's not to say that everyone can be very clinical about it. I mean, I know for sure, and I'm not going to name names, but sometimes I've heard a therapist say, well, that was quite an attractive guy. She doesn't want to do anything to him, but you're just saying that they were attractive. They were still human beings. But saying he's attractive and I want to take him home and do nasty things to him, now that's something else. But, I think that the ethics are really, really important. What was the second part of your question?
So, do you think on which occasions the therapist shouldn't be let to work with a client if they have some mental disorder?
Okay, about clients. Okay, so that's a good question. Is like answering questions with another question like a mental disorder? No. Okay, when shouldn't they? Listen, it comes down to personal ethics. I think that some people are just out there, let's be honest, as therapists, to pimp their egos. Look at how important I am. I'm smarter than you. I can shape. I'm Dr. Strange or whatever. It's an ego thing. I've met a few people in my life that were doing it for their egos. To be important. I felt that they were not giving a good quality of care. Subjective opinion. You can't sue me because I didn't mention your name, but you know who you are. They were manipulative of their patients. They were getting off on the power and control. I don't like it. I mean, if I was to say what my approach is, like Patch Adams, I love that man. His approach to medicine, that's my approach to therapy. So I love the person. I'm there to love the best part of that person, not in a sexual sense. I'm not there. This is not like my pickup act, but some people do use that, Dan. So I know your question was about with the disorder. Should someone with a disorder, let me put it this way. If you had a specialist oncologist who had cancer, working still in a hospital, working with other people with cancer, what would you say to them? Do you think that they should continue working as a oncologist, if just even though they're ill, would you? Obviously, it's a different specialization, but what do you think? Do you think an oncologist who has got cancer should be working with people with cancer?
I mean, until he's capable of working,
sure,
he should, I would say.
It's entirely up to him, but obviously this is different because in a way...
I mean, not should, but like if he wants to continue.
Yeah, that bastard, you should be working. Lazy guy. Listen, personally, this is just my opinion. I think that if you've got, in particular, like dark triad personality traits, you should not be working as a therapist. Because, particularly with narcissists, they require attention all the time. And I know a few who work as therapists, and I think they might say that they understand narcissists. And I'm not saying to abandon them, not at all. But I think some of them train them in a way. And I think we don't need more of them. Well, basically, I would just say this. If there was a school for sociopaths and psychopaths, welcome to the school for sociopaths and psychopaths. We train you how to murder, and all other fun things. Basket weaving on Thursdays, that kind of thing. I think it's dangerous, obviously, for that. Sometimes, actually, truth be told, the best people to help other people are the ones who know what it's like. So I think you have empathy, genuine empathy. I think that from my own perspective, I have a lot more empathy for people who do suffer from PTSD and CPTSD because I have to deal with it too. And I'll be honest with you, I deal with it on a daily basis, every day. Something is there and I need to address it. So whether it's mindfulness or cleaning my house or doing something else or not doing something else. There's always the to do and the not to do list. Do this, don't be a nut job, don't do that, no, yes, no, okay, or maybe not. And sometimes I'd say one common thing with people that do suffer from PTSD and CPTSD, they can suffer from different levels of depression, really crippling depression, mild depression, anxiousness all the time. But listen, if someone is being legitimately diagnosed, let's just say like by a psychiatrist as having like the dark triad on steroids, I would say no, keep them far away. You wouldn't want kind of a dangerous person helping other people. It's a very tricky question, in fact, who guards the guards then? Who gets to decide who's good and who's bad? Unfortunately, and I'm not saying there's not enough regulation, there's not enough transparency to figure out, a lot of people can slide under the radar. Do I think they should be doing it? Probably not. It's like, and this is where I will sound controversial, I would never put a pedophile as a class teacher for a bunch of little kids. It's like starving a big shark and then cutting yourself and, I want to go swim with the shark because we're going to have hugs and everything. And the shark's like, ho, baby, you're asking for trouble then. I think you have to kind of balance it out, but you want to be careful.
So you would say if a person can control it, can cope with it,
Those are big questions. Go control it. It sounds like don't turn into a vampire. No, vampire. Gosh. Without sounding like a hypocrite, let's put it this way. I have to make it on an individual judgment. If I felt that I wasn't being of any use, if I wasn't doing something constructive or positive, then I think I have a duty to take a step back, to let someone better take a step forward to help others. I don't know if other people will do that because of the egos, status, you know. There was a series called Dr. Death about a guy who was a sort of specialist surgeon, spinal surgeon. And it took other doctors to get rid of him, to actually investigate, because the organizations that supported him didn't want to investigate the fact he was crippling people and killing them. But because of his personality, he could sort of just like get away with it. And it took 2 specialists over a period of years to get rid of him. So to rely on an individual to do that, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of government over-regulation, but here's another sad thing about people who go to therapy. They don't really report the abuse, because it's compounded then. I've already experienced abuse, I've experienced more abuse, and they're even less likely to talk about it. It's sort of one of those hidden things. There's various processes that are used for certification to ensure that there's a competence of knowledge, but there's not really a way to determine a competence of ethics. So that's a very interesting area that you're talking about. Do I think they should? Let me be straight with you. Some of the best therapists are the most fucked up people you could imagine. Let's be honest. Because they know what it's like, but it's like the Hulk, okay? He can contain his rage. It doesn't sound good. He can contain what's going on in a healthy way that's non-destructive to other people. So I think some of the best ones, like I know of some surgeons, okay? They are not great, loving, huggy-buggy people. I want to give you a hug, that's a surgeon. Get rid of. And they're like, but they're brilliant. If you need to save your life saved, they will save your life. One's a neurosurgeon. He's got a personality that has more personality than him. But he's a super serious surgeon. And he will save your life. But he won't be your friend.
Yeah.
And that guy could be seen as like, well, he's antisocial and he's probably got this and this and this. But when your life's on the line, he's going to save it. And some therapists as well, like when your life's on the line, that's what Frankl did. Frankl had a very interesting record. Not one suicide on his watch. When he was running psychiatric hospital, not one. That's pretty effing impressive.
It is.
I mean, obviously people still, sadly enough, commit suicide.
Would you say that it's true that PTSD is diagnosed mostly in soldiers, or it is also in civilians?
I'd say it's in both, actually. I'd say there will be more diagnosis in soldiers and veterans. But we must also look at the sample size, also sample grouping. So in a society where, you've got a country that sends their soldiers off to war. There's worry and fear about the soldiers go over there. Even if they don't actually kill anyone, they don't have to really be involved, but they're involved in that group activity. It can be a group activity as well, with individual consequences. They come back, dun dun da, we're the heroes, and that kind of thing. Here's the sad thing about CPTSD, which I was talking about before, it's time delayed. So more than often, particularly with CPTSD, some people will have nightmares, must be over and done with, relatively speaking. Look at the guy who killed Chris Kyle, okay? The American sniper. That was a soldier who came back from Iraq and lost his mind and killed his hero. Anyway, let's just go back to your question though. The thing is this, okay, so they bring their trauma back home, and it does start to interfere. It can actually have what we could call a secondary effect that you can end up traumatizing people next to you, your family, your friends, your society, your culture, your community. So there's a secondary transmission. So in a way, the war comes home with them, and the war gets then taken out on the people around you. So I think, yes, it's certainly more soldiers, but we look at primary effect, secondary effect, and knock on, and that can, there can be. This is the sad thing. It's sort of like a law of unintended consequences. You don't know who it's going to affect. Can you imagine? Some guy very depressed, gets drunk, is driving in another part of the country which he's not even from, crashes into a car, kills a family. His CPTSD has killed another family, and so the war is like a cancer in a way. The suffering is a cancer, which then gets distributed across the whole country. So we may say, in a way, the more war that we engage in, the more negative consequences we take back to our communities. But you see, we don't account for, no one's really done, let's be honest, like with Afghanistan, I don't know any research that's gone into like what are the consequences of the effect of the civilian population and the soldiers and everyone else there.
Yeah.
It's
the majority of research that I occurred, it was mostly veterans. Sure.
No, but what I mean, like, in a way, like, we have veterans who are classified as fighting soldiers, combatants. But in a way, I think sometimes you could look at veterans as people that have survived, because it's another kind of war. It's a war to stay alive or stay sane.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more, CPTSD is definitely more in primary, primary cases will be in soldiers, for sure. But you can also find it in people, in first responders, EMR, but more prevalent amongst soldiers. Yes, sir.
Would you say that it can go to remission, after undergoing some treatment?
I think there's definitely a problem with psychology using the terms of medicine. I think they're cheating. As it was explained to me, and I kind of agree with it. If you have like a spiral which comes out, you have two sets of axes, okay? So if this is, you could have many axes actually, but let's just say this is a trauma event, this is a trauma event. With a spiral, when it's narrow, you'll be hitting those lines quite frequently, but the longer it goes out, the less frequent it can become. Depends, like with everything, it's sort of like positive or negative reinforcement. If you positively reinforce a negative experience, and that can be, what does that mean? Well, you can invest energy into that, then you cement it as being something emotionally important, you amplify it. It may dissipate, so it may go from times where you feel it very intensely to less. We would hope, and this is that it would flatten out over time. Eventually it does flatten out because you're dead. Then you're not going to feel anything anymore. Okay, it sounds kind of morbid, but no, I think that one of the, we've had lots of progression over the years with like EMDR and different forms of treatment. Now we're looking at using MDMA, ketamine, also, should we say, psilocybin treatments to try and help the kind of like, they're looking at, we want to rewire the brain as such. Well, it's not exactly wiring, we don't exactly know how neurons all kind of like party together as such. The synaptic, the proximity of so we say, the distribution of neurons and how that relates to memory and other things. Ian McGilchrist, check that out. You should do a little neuroscience. You know, I think the thing is that if you don't go and get some help, it's probably only going to get worse over time. So with intervention, I think there's a greater probability of you being able to cope better. So what is coping? So let's look at an event, okay? So something is a trigger. It causes a spike in anxiety, and you want to kind of like get it back to sort of a normal flow. If we had a sort of a sine wave, you want to kind of bring it back to a flow. You don't want too many spikes like this, because it just overloads your body, and you probably will be a nightmare to work with or be around. So you want to kind of try and normalize that, and for what is normal for you, so you can function. Because if you're just like, I'm not leaving my house, I just can't do anything, I'm freaking out. Like with anything, if you don't address it, sooner or later, Freud said this, everyone said it, it's going to come back. It's like a boomerang. You have a boomerang this big, and you throw it out, and it comes back like that. You're like, I thought the boomerang was that big. Oh, it was 5 years ago. You know, you have to kind of, you need to go and get some help, you know. If you had like a broken leg, you're like, it's fine, I'll just drag it around. It'll come okay when I sleep, and like your leg's like this now. How's your leg doing? It just seems to be sleeping, or something else, you know. You want to get help, yes, you certainly, but in terms of remission, okay, or should we say more in terms of frequency of occurrence, you want to try and space it out as much as possible. That's what you want to do. You want to try and space it out so you've got enough time in your life to develop new habits, to develop new responses, that you can then say, when something comes up, you can go, you know what? I'm suffering, but I don't have to freak out. I don't have to hit the booze. I don't have to hit the drugs. I don't have to hit anyone. You know, you have a way to cope. And a lot of it is actually like through processing it. Like, what is processing that? You know, again, I'll refer back to Bessel van der Kolk. The body keeps the score. You need to get it out.
Yeah.
So first of all, it's like getting it out as much as possible, finding coping techniques, but also remembering that if you have to use mindfulness in a way like, is this happening right now? Yes or no? If no, okay, I'm still hurt by it. How can I detach myself from the situation? How can I appreciate and respect my feelings for what happened? And how can I grieve? It's another important part of CPTSD for a lot of people. How do I grieve what I've lost? Because you know what? It's a sense of loss. It's a loss of identity. It's a loss of connectivity to your being. Who am I now after this terrible thing has happened? So you have to go through the grieving process, which is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had magic work on this. You know, you have to grieve, you have to reconcile, and you have to move on, you know, at the end, or else, you know, like, grief can kill you. Really, it can. And maybe in a way, you know, you've just made something interesting, Dan, and I never thought about it before till right now. In a way, actually, what the symptoms of PTSD are a collection of grief responses that haven't had resolution. That's a much better definition. It's grief without resolution and meaning. And you're like, oh, well, you know, let's attach some meaning here. What does it mean to me now? You know, I've lost this. How do I restore my faith back in myself or in life or something like that? Yeah, so it's a slightly different interpretation of it, but it's more human interpretation. When you've seen some devastating things, what is grief in effect? It can be two things. It can be your loss or someone else's loss that you empathize with. You know, when you see someone who's hurt and you want to help them, a part of you knows what feeling hurt is like, and you want to help alleviate their hurt. That's also love as well, you know.
This is the end of part 1 about PTSD with Lyndon. In part 2 we will talk about crisis in Ukraine and PTSD and some tips on how to cope with all emotions that arise during the war and some tips how to deal with it. So keep updated and follow and subscribe to my channel for more videos and more content. Thank you.